The apartment smelled like tangerines, cinnamon, and potato salad. From the kitchen came the clatter of dishes, the sizzling of frying chicken, and the muffled hum of the TV playing when Harry met Sally for what felt like the 20th time. On the wall hung a slightly crooked paper banner that read, 2024. Made last year by the youngest brother and never taken down. Dad, Mark, 47, an optimistic engineer with a hacker's curiosity and the heart of Santa Claus, marched through the apartment with a mischievous grin. For 3 days, he had barely contained the smug satisfaction of knowing he'd come up with the most original New Year's gift in family history. He felt like a kid who had hidden not a toy car under the tree, but a working walkie-talkie with a 3-kilometer range. "Sarah," he called, peeking into the kitchen. "Do we have any of that gold wrapping paper? Or at least the one with molecules on it?" "What molecules, Mark?" "That was candy wrapping paper," his wife replied from behind a pile of carrots. She had the tired yet loving tone of a woman who'd been married for over 20 years. "You could help me with the carrots instead." But Mark had a mission. On the couch lay a large bag with 5 small boxes, each labeled neatly with a sticky note. Sarah, Ryan, Emily, Josh, Mom, Grandma, and even a 6th one with no name. Just in case. Inside each box was a DNA test kit. He wasn't trying to accuse anyone. Of course not. It was just fun. What if one of them had Viking blood? Or Polish roots? Maybe someone had that rare gene that lets you digest lactose. It was like fortune-telling, but scientific. And hilarious. "Dad, are you scheming again?" Emily, the daughter, a university student and cynic by nature, popped her head around the corner. "This is going to be the most memorable New Year's Eve yet," Mark declared. "You'll thank me later. Like after the prank with the rubber sardine? That was a classic." The clock struck 6. A few hours left till midnight. Sarah was starting to panic. "Mark, nothing's even chopped yet. And you're running around with your little boxes." But Mark stood firm. He could already picture it. In a week, they'd all sit at the table again, open their test results on his laptop, laugh, be amazed, maybe even tear up a little. Science brings people together like nothing else. In the corner, the Christmas tree sparkled with multicolored lights. Josh, the youngest son, a 10th grader, was putting the finishing touches on it, placing the star on top, the one that always lost the prong. He had no idea his life was about to be turned upside down, like that star falling straight onto his head. But for now, things were simple: family, warmth, music, and salad. And Mark, whispering to himself, "Just wait. It's going to be unforgettable." He was right. Just not in the way he expected. The new year was approaching amid the usual set of clichés. Grandma was adjusting her shawl for the 3rd time, the grandkids were arguing over whose salad tasted better, and Mom was trying to fry meat, check the oven, and wave at Dad all at once to get the Christmas boxes out of the middle of the living room. Mark, however, was beaming. He was waiting for the perfect moment. He had even rehearsed lines in his head for presenting the gifts. "When science meets celebration." No, too pompous. "A gift that reveals the truth." Maybe skip the word truth. Too risky. He settled on. "It's like when Harry met Sally, but with results." Perfect. At 11:42 p.m., the gift exchange began. First came the traditional stuff: socks, mugs, massage vouchers, cookbooks, and the obligatory mumbled thank yous. Then it was Mark's moment. "And now, my special gift," he announced. He proudly pulled out the small boxes. "These are DNA test kits. For each of you." He began handing them out. "To Sarah, for your patience. To Ryan, so he can finally learn where all that laziness comes from. To Emily, to explain that Italian nose. To Josh, because you're a surprise on your own. To Mom, you're the matriarch, maybe there's royalty in your blood." Everyone laughed. Even Grandma. "What's the point of this?" asked Ryan, the brother, programmer, and resident skeptic. "Well, it's fun. Maybe one of you is 5% Finnish. Or you'll find out why someone's allergic to strawberries." Or whose kid? Emily muttered with a chuckle. Sarah let out a sharp, awkward snort. Too sharp. But no one noticed. The champagne was already going around for the second time. Mark was thrilled. Everyone, despite their smirks, agreed to do the test. They discussed how weird the saliva samples might look, who would send them off, and how they'd all gather to watch the results like a new Netflix show. 11:58 p.m. Everyone rushed to the TV. Hurry! The president's about to talk about stability again. Mark set the boxes on the table and sat next to Sarah. He felt like a hero. A family scientist. The architect of a historic new year. Midnight. Chimes. Champagne. Laughter. Herring under a fur coat. Sparkling eyes. Toasts. They were still together. For now. A week passed. The New Year buzz faded, and life slipped back into its usual winter rhythm. Gray skies, muddy sidewalks, and that strange melancholy only early January brings. But in Mark's home, things were anything but ordinary. It was a Saturday evening when the email arrived. The subject line read, "Your DNA results are ready." Mark nearly dropped his coffee. He scrambled to gather everyone for a casual, family tea time, his excitement barely masked by his efforts to act nonchalant. The family trickled into the living room one by one, holding mugs of cocoa and balancing plates of cookies. Mark had already hooked up his laptop to the TV, the screen flashing the DNA platform's homepage. He even made a little sign and taped it to the table. Genealogy night. Party popper. Do we get popcorn with this drama? Emily quipped as she plopped onto the couch. Don't be dramatic, Sarah muttered, though her eyes were just as curious as the others. Mark opened the first profile, Sarah. A cheery pie chart appeared. 99.7% Northwestern European. 0.3% Sephardic Jewish. Sarah squinted at the screen. Well, guess my great-great-grandma really did have a secret recipe or two. Everyone chuckled. Next, Ryan. 98.9% Northwestern European. 1.1% Finno-Ugric ancestry. I knew there was something weird about how much I like saunas. Ryan grinned. Then came Emily. 97.5% Northwestern European. 2.5% Mediterranean, Southern Italian/Greek. Told you! She shouted triumphantly, pointing at her nose. Mark raised his hands in mock surrender. I never doubted your Greco-Roman profile. Finally, Josh. Mark hesitated, his finger hovering over the trackpad. But Josh nodded. Go on, he said. The page loaded. Then froze. Then refreshed. The chart was odd. Off. 99.9% Northwestern European. Biological father, not a match. Relationship to Mark Johnson, 0% probability of paternity. The air in the room stopped. The silence wasn't dramatic, it was dead. The kind of silence that sinks into your chest and pulls your heartbeat down with it. What? Josh said softly, staring at the screen. Mark blinked. He stared harder. He clicked, refresh, like a man hoping for a different lottery number. Nothing changed. Must be a mistake, he said quickly. These kits, they mess up all the time. Could have mislabeled the swabs. Maybe we switched yours with someone else's. But Josh had already pulled away from the group slightly, like an invisible wall had risen between him and the rest of the family. Emily looked over at her mom. Sarah was frozen, her face unreadable, blank, except for the small tick at the corner of her mouth. Sarah? Emily asked, her voice dropping. Is this right? Sarah didn't answer. Not right away. Then she stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen without a word, and started boiling water. Everyone stayed seated, no one daring to move or break the fragile, cracking reality they now inhabited. Mark closed the laptop. I'm calling the company, he said too loudly. It's nonsense. All of it. Josh is my son. But Josh wasn't looking at him anymore. He was staring out the window. Snow had started to fall, light, quiet, peaceful. Outside, the world looked normal. Inside, everything had just changed. Forever. The kettle hissed in the kitchen. Sarah stood motionless, her hand resting on the edge of the counter, eyes fixed on the rising steam like it held answers. She hadn't said a word since walking out of the living room. Her movements were mechanical now, reach, pour, stir, but her mind was somewhere far, far away. Back in the living room, no one knew what to do. Josh was still by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the falling snow. His reflection in the glass looked older than 15. Like someone who had aged a year in 5 minutes. Emily sat on the armrest of the couch, hugging a throw pillow like it could shield her from the weird pressure hanging in the air. Ryan had taken his usual retreat posture, leaning back with arms folded and one eyebrow raised, as if trying to stay above it all. But he wasn't fooling anyone. Mark was shaking. He had always been the cheerful glue of the family, the goofy optimist who diffused tension with dad jokes and science trivia. But now his hands were trembling, and his brain was firing in every direction at once, trying to logic his way out of this emotional earthquake. "Okay," he said finally, his voice dry. "Let's assume the worst. Maybe there was a mistake. Years ago. A hospital mix-up? Or maybe Sarah was pregnant before we met and didn't realize?" Ryan flinched. "Dude!" "What?" Mark snapped, suddenly defensive. "I'm trying to make sense of this." "No," Emily said sharply. "You're trying to build a safety net made of maybes." Josh turned around slowly. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. "Is it true?" They all turned toward the kitchen. Sarah stood there, holding a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She met Josh's eyes. And nodded. Just once. The room felt like it fell in on itself. Like the walls had shrunk, and the ceiling dipped. Mark sat down slowly. "How long have you known?" he asked. Sarah took a moment before answering. "I always knew," she said. "But I convinced myself it didn't matter. That it was just a technicality." "A technicality?" Mark's voice cracked. "I raised him. He's my son." "He is your son," Sarah said, her voice rising for the first time. "He's yours in every way that counts. But not in the one that just showed up on a $50 test," Ryan muttered. Emily shot him a glare. "Not helping." Josh was pale. His voice trembled. "Who is he?" "What?" Sarah asked. "My biological father," Josh said. "Who is he?" Silence. Sarah opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked down at her tea. "I don't know," she whispered. And somehow, that was worse than any name she could have said. Josh left the room. Not running. Not crying. Just walking. He grabbed his coat from the hook and stepped outside into the snow without another word. Josh didn't go far. He didn't need to. The cold hit him the moment he stepped outside, but he welcomed it. It bit at his fingers, turned his breath into mist, numbed the edges of everything. It was better than sitting inside, surrounded by faces trying to be gentle. He sat down on the old wooden bench just beyond the apartment entrance. The kind that was too cold to sit on, too worn to be comfortable. Perfect, in other words. Snowflakes landed on his shoulders. A few melted into the corner of his eye. He didn't wipe them away. Inside, chaos reigned. Sarah stood in the middle of the living room, like the eye of a hurricane. Mark paced back and forth, muttering half-finished sentences, his hands in his hair. Ryan had retreated to the kitchen and was washing a clean glass over and over. Emily sat on the stairs, phone in hand, typing furiously, maybe to a friend, maybe just to get her fingers to stop shaking. "Did you ever think maybe we should have known?" Mark suddenly snapped at Sarah. "That maybe this isn't just your secret." "I was going to tell him," Sarah said. "One day. When he was older. He's 15, Sarah." "I know. I didn't think a stupid New Year's gift would be the thing to rip it all open." Mark turned away. His voice dropped. Neither did I. The door creaked open. Emily appeared with a coat and scarf. I'm going to check on him, she said. No, Mark said quickly. Let me. But Emily shook her head. Dad? Maybe not right now. She slipped out into the snow and spotted Josh immediately, hunched over, elbows on knees, breath fogging the air. She sat beside him in silence. For almost a minute, neither of them said anything. The snow fell in thick, lazy spirals. Streetlights glowed like paper lanterns. You okay? She asked eventually. Josh didn't answer. She tried again. You want me to punch Dad for you? Josh huffed. It might have been a laugh. Or not. After a while he said, You think I'm different now? What, since 10 minutes ago? He gave her a sideways look. She sighed. You're still the same annoying little brother who puts ketchup on lasagna and listens to lo-fi remixes of my craft music at full volume. That's oddly specific. I have a list. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then it faded. I don't even know who I am. Sure you do, Emily said. You're Josh Johnson. You hate olives. You have a mole behind your ear shaped like a comma. You cried at Wally. You once named a stray cat General Tuna and built him a cardboard castle. He looked down. I just don't know why Mom didn't tell me. Emily hesitated. I don't know either. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought she was protecting you. Or maybe she didn't know how to say it without breaking everything. Josh nodded slowly. Well, she broke it anyway. Emily nudged him with her shoulder. Then we'll fix it. One piece at a time. They sat there a while longer, snow collecting in their hair, the world slowly quieting around them. Behind them, the light in the apartment flickered behind curtains. And somewhere inside, Mark and Sarah sat on opposite ends of the couch, not speaking. Not ready to. Not yet. The night had deepened, but the air inside the apartment felt like it was holding its breath, the stillness thick enough to feel suffocating. Josh still hadn't come back in, and Sarah wasn't sure she could handle any more words, not now. Mark hadn't said anything for at least half an hour, but she could feel the weight of his stare from across the room. Finally, he broke the silence. I'm sorry, Mark said quietly. I should have known. Sarah looked up. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his voice that made her heart ache, even if it felt too late. You don't have to apologize, she whispered. I made my choice, not you. She cut herself off, rubbing her eyes, trying to push down the lump in her throat. I thought it didn't matter. I really did. I thought you'd still be his father, no matter what. I don't care about that, Mark said, his voice rising slightly. I care about the fact that I don't know anything anymore. I don't know if we've been living a lie for years or what. And I don't even know what I'm supposed to do next. It's all wrong. Sarah shook her head. You're wrong, Mark. It's not wrong. It's just messy. But not everything messy is broken. I don't even know who to be anymore, Sarah. Everything's been upside down for hours. What do I do? Do what you've always done. Love him. Love him? Yes, love him. Your son is out there, freezing in the snow, trying to figure out who he is. And you need to be his father, whether the test says you're a match or not. She stood up slowly, walking toward the window. It felt like she was talking to herself now. I didn't know how to tell him. I didn't know if it would break him. I didn't want him to hate me. Her voice cracked. But this is worse. Mark didn't answer. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the floor, lost in thought. Then, in a voice so quiet Sarah almost didn't hear it, he spoke again. Do you regret it? For a long time, Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. There was too much she regretted, too much she didn't know. It was like a weight was pressing down on her chest, but the real answer wasn't something she could say aloud. I can't say I don't regret it, she whispered. But I don't regret Josh. I couldn't. The air felt thick again, suffocating, as if something more was coming. As if the storm wasn't over yet. Meanwhile, Emily and Josh sat on the steps just outside the apartment building, still watching the snow fall. He had stopped talking a while ago, his face tense, but Emily didn't press. She wasn't sure what else to say. "So, what's the next step?" Emily finally asked, her voice breaking the silence between them. Josh looked up at the stars, his breath a mist in the cold night air. "I don't know." "You don't have to have all the answers, you know," she said a little softer. "No one does. I don't. Mom doesn't. And Mark sure as hell doesn't." Josh glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Mark's been acting like he's got everything figured out for years." "Yeah, well, that's Mark for you." They sat together quietly for a while. Eventually, Emily stood up, stretching. "Come on. We should go back inside. They'll probably be worried." Josh hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." When they stepped back inside, the apartment was just as silent, but the tension had shifted. Sarah was sitting at the table now, a cup of tea between her hands, staring at the surface as though trying to see something hidden there. "Josh," Mark began, but Josh held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not ready to talk about it," Josh said. His voice was calm, quieter than usual, but it carried a weight that made everyone pause. "I just need time." "We're here when you're ready," Mark said quietly, his eyes searching Josh's face, looking for something, reassurance, maybe? Or maybe permission to be the father he thought he was supposed to be. Josh nodded, not trusting himself to say more. He turned to leave the room, but Sarah called after him. "Josh, wait." He paused at the doorway, but didn't turn around. "You're still my son," she said, her voice breaking again. "You'll always be my son." Josh's shoulders tensed, but he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew. And with that, he disappeared down the hall to his room. The weight in the room remained, heavy and palpable. Nothing had been resolved. Nothing had been fixed. But somehow, for the first time in hours, the silence felt a little less suffocating. The morning came too soon. The air was frigid, colder than it had any right to be for early January. Snow still clung to the windows, frosting over the edges like nature itself was trying to keep the outside world at bay. Inside, the apartment felt like a fragile shell, barely holding itself together. Mark had barely slept, tossing and turning, his mind racing over every word, every look from the night before. The look on Josh's face, as if he were a stranger, as if the family they had built together didn't matter. It was all he could see when he closed his eyes. That, and Sarah's quiet confession, the words she had whispered like a broken promise. He had to fix this. But how? He got up early, far earlier than anyone else, and started making breakfast. The sound of eggs cracking and sizzling on the stove felt like the only thing he could control. He moved with a mechanical precision, not thinking about the situation, just about the task in front of him. Sarah woke up to the smell of frying bacon, a comfort that felt oddly out of place in the midst of the storm swirling inside her chest. She stood in the doorway, watching Mark work in silence. She was tired, drained. Her body felt like it was made of lead. The weight of everything still pressed on her shoulders. But the smell of breakfast, familiar, simple, routine, was the closest thing to normality they had right now. She wasn't sure what to say to him. She didn't know how to bridge the distance between them that had opened in the last 24 hours. There were words, but they felt too heavy to speak, too fragile to handle. "Mark," she said softly, her voice quiet as she approached the kitchen. He didn't look up, but his hand paused in midair. He was holding a spatula, ready to flip the eggs, but something about her tone stopped him. "Yeah? She hesitated, not sure what words would come out. Not sure what she even wanted to say. "I'm sorry." Mark didn't answer. He just turned, his face unreadable. There was pain in his eyes, something darker than just the confusion from the night before. "Are you?" he asked, his voice low, tight. Sarah flinched at the edge in his tone, but she nodded slowly. "Yes." But I don't know how to make it right. He set the spatula down on the counter. The sizzle of the eggs was the only sound between them for a long moment. I don't think we can make it right, Sarah, Mark said, his voice shaking just a little. You've kept this from me for how long? And now we're supposed to act like everything's fine? I didn't want this to happen this way, she said, stepping closer. I didn't want you to find out like this. I thought I could fix it before it ever came to this. You didn't fix anything by hiding it. You just made it worse. Mark, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you or Josh. I know you didn't, Mark interrupted, rubbing his forehead. But it's still happening, Sarah. It's not like it's just going to go away. I know that, she said, her voice rising. She took a breath and forced herself to calm down. But I can't go back. I can't change it. I can only deal with what's in front of me now. Mark didn't answer immediately. He turned back to the stove, flipping the eggs and pushing the bacon to the side. But he didn't seem like he was cooking anymore. It was like he was just going through the motions. We can't fix this without talking, Sarah, he said, his voice softer now, almost tired. I know, she said. I want to talk. But every time I try, it feels like everything falls apart. Maybe it has to fall apart first, Mark said, so we can put it back together the right way. She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the floor. I don't know if we can put it back together. Mark let out a shaky sigh. We'll try. Meanwhile, in his room, Josh sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. He hadn't been able to sleep either. The night's events had left him feeling like he was trapped in a maze, every turn leading to a new dead end. He couldn't stop thinking about the test results, the numbers on the screen, the cold certainty of them. He knew that Sarah and Mark were probably talking now, trying to sort things out. He could hear their voices faintly, but it didn't make him feel better. There was no comfort in their words, no assurance that things would go back to normal. Josh felt like he didn't belong in this family anymore. Like he was an outsider, standing on the edge of something he didn't understand. He heard a knock at the door. Josh? It was Emily's voice. He didn't respond, not right away. Can I come in? She asked softly. Josh sighed and leaned back against the wall. Sure. Emily opened the door slowly and stepped inside, closing it behind her. She looked at him for a moment, her expression a mix of concern and uncertainty. Do you want to talk? Josh shook his head, his hands in his lap. Not really. She sat down next to him, her gaze fixed on the floor. It's okay if you don't. I want you to know that I'm here, okay? Whatever you need. Josh didn't look at her, but he nodded. Thanks. Emily stayed with him for a while, either of them speaking. The silence between them felt less heavy than the silence downstairs. She could hear Sarah and Mark talking, but it wasn't the same. They were still trying to figure out what to do next, still trying to fix everything. It wasn't like that with her and Josh. There was no pressure, no expectation. Just quiet understanding. Do you ever feel like you're in the middle of a storm and no one can see it? Josh asked after a long pause. Emily turned to him, a small, sad smile on her face. All the time. Josh finally looked at her, his face softening just a little. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fix this, he said quietly. You don't have to, Emily replied. You just have to keep going. Josh stared at her for a moment before nodding slowly. Yeah, he said. I guess you're right. The day dragged on in silence. Mark and Sarah continued their quiet, strained conversations. Emily kept Josh company when he needed her. But no one really knew what to say or how to fix what had been broken. All they could do was wait. Wait until things felt normal again. Wait until they found a way forward. The silence in the apartment had become a living thing. It hung between each person, thick and heavy, like a presence none of them could shake off. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only thing that broke it, an incessant reminder that time kept moving forward, regardless of their feelings or unresolved issues. Sarah hadn't left the kitchen since breakfast. She wasn't cooking anymore, just staring out the window, watching the snow fall, one flake at a time, as if hoping the world outside might reset itself. But the stillness of the world outside felt nothing like the turmoil inside her heart. Mark, on the other hand, had retreated to the living room, sitting on the couch with his hands clasped in his lap. He was trying to focus on anything but the mess they were in. His mind kept replaying the argument, the words Sarah had said, and then Josh's quiet retreat. But the more he thought, the more it felt like the pieces didn't fit together anymore. Emily had gone out for a walk, leaving Josh alone in his room. It was quiet there, too, but in a different way. His room had always been a sanctuary for him, a place where he could think, or not think at all. But today, it felt cold, like the air itself was frozen. He lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the strange feeling in his chest, a feeling of being pulled in two different directions. Part of him wanted to confront the truth. He wanted answers, to understand why this had all happened. But another part of him wanted to ignore it, to pretend nothing had changed, even though everything had. He closed his eyes, pushing back the tears that threatened to fall. He didn't want to cry. Not here. Not now. But it didn't stop the ache from gnawing at him. The door creaked open, and for a moment, Josh thought it might be Emily. He opened his eyes, but it wasn't Emily standing there. It was Sarah. She hesitated at the door, like she wasn't sure if she should come in. "Josh?" Her voice was soft, tentative. Josh sat up quickly, wiping his eyes before she could see. His heart was still pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to expect, but he wasn't sure he was ready for another conversation. I just wanted to check on you," Sarah said, stepping into the room but not sitting down. She stood at the foot of the bed, her hands wringing together. "How are you?" Josh didn't answer right away. He was still trying to wrap his head around everything. How could he even begin to answer that question when he wasn't sure of his own feelings? "I don't know," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I don't think I'm okay." Sarah's expression softened, and she took a step closer. "I know. I'm so sorry, Josh. I should have told you sooner. I thought I was protecting you, but I wasn't. I was just hiding." Josh's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't look up. "Hiding what?" Sarah swallowed, sitting down beside him on the bed. The distance between them felt vast, but she wasn't going to push him away again. Not now. Not after everything. "I hid the truth. About your father. About Mark," she said softly. "I kept it from you for so long because I thought it would be easier. I thought maybe it wouldn't matter. But it does, doesn't it?" Josh clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. The pain was still there, deep inside, but it was different now. It was sharper, more real. "You never thought it would matter? That I would care?" "I don't know," Sarah whispered. "I thought I was keeping everything safe. But now it's all falling apart." Josh felt a wave of anger rise inside him, but it wasn't directed at Sarah. It wasn't her fault, or maybe it was. He didn't know anymore. Everything was too tangled. "Do you love him?" he blurted out. His voice cracked, and he cursed himself for it. Sarah's face faltered. She looked away for a moment, then back at Josh, her eyes full of regret. "Yes, Josh. I do. I always have. I love him. But I also love you. I don't love you any less because of this." Josh didn't know how to respond. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His throat felt tight, like he was choking on words he didn't have. "I never wanted to hurt you," Sarah said quietly, her voice breaking. "I thought I could protect you from all of this. But I was wrong." Josh took a deep breath and finally looked at her. The anger was still there, but it was mingled with something else, confusion, hurt, and a strange sense of betrayal. "I don't know what to do with this, Mom," he said, his voice low. "I don't know how to fix it." "You don't have to fix it, Josh," she said gently. "You just have to let it be. Let yourself feel whatever you need to feel. And when you're ready, we'll all figure it out together. Josh sat back against the wall, his mind racing. It wasn't easy to let go of all the questions, to just let it be. But he wasn't ready to do anything else. Not yet. I don't want things to be like this, he said quietly. I don't either, Sarah whispered. They sat there for a long time, the silence between them not as oppressive as before, but still heavy with unspoken words. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a small sense of peace in the room. Not resolution, not answers, but a shared understanding that, maybe, just maybe, things could still be fixed. Meanwhile, in the living room, Mark stared out the window, watching the snow fall, trying to make sense of everything. It had been a long, long night, and he knew there was still so much left to unravel. But maybe, just maybe, the thread wasn't completely broken. Maybe they could start pulling at it, piece by piece, until they found a way to put it all back together. The air inside the apartment felt thick with unspoken thoughts, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Time had moved on since Sarah and Josh had their quiet moment, but the unresolved tension in the space had only deepened. The silence between them felt heavier now, as if every word, every gesture, was charged with 1,000 unspoken things. It was like walking on a tightrope, and none of them knew if they would make it across. Mark hadn't left the living room all morning. He was still sitting in the same spot, staring blankly at the snow outside the window. He hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't even moved to eat the breakfast he'd prepared with such mechanical precision earlier that day. His mind was too full, too occupied by the knot of emotions in his chest. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending to be okay. Sarah, after her conversation with Josh, had retreated to her room. She needed space to breathe, to think, to process. But even there, she couldn't escape the pressure of what had happened, what was still happening. It felt like everything she had carefully built, her family, her life, was unraveling thread by thread. Meanwhile, Emily, sensing the fragile state of things, had taken it upon herself to keep the peace. She had spent most of the morning trying to distract Josh with small talk and games, anything to keep his mind from wandering back to the storm that had hit the night before. But she knew, deep down, that none of them were really okay. Not even close. Josh sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the closed door, his thoughts racing. He didn't want to feel this way. He didn't want to feel betrayed, confused, hurt. He hated it. He hated the fact that this one thing, this one test, had upended everything he had ever known. It wasn't just the results. It was the lies. It was the fact that his entire life had been built on a foundation of half-truths, things that had been hidden from him for years. And now, everything felt fragile. Everything felt like it could crumble at any moment. Josh? Emily's voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. He looked up, surprised to see her standing in the doorway, her expression more serious than usual. Yeah? He asked, his voice rough. Can we talk? He hesitated but nodded. Sure. Emily walked in and sat down next to him. She didn't say anything at first, just sat quietly, waiting for him to speak. Do you ever feel like you're just waiting? Josh asked suddenly, his voice low. Like you're just standing still, waiting for everything to fall into place, but it never does. Emily nodded slowly. Yeah. All the time. I think everyone feels that way at some point. Josh frowned. But why? Why can't it just be easy? Why can't it just be normal? It's never easy, Josh. If it was, it wouldn't mean anything. Emily paused, looking at him with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. You're looking for answers, but sometimes the answers aren't enough. Sometimes you have to accept that you won't ever have all the answers. Josh's shoulders slumped. I don't think I can do that. I can't just let go. You don't have to let go of everything. You just have to let go of the things that don't serve you anymore. Josh was silent for a moment, taking in what she said. I don't even know what that means. Emily smiled softly. It means that you're allowed to feel hurt. You're allowed to be angry. But you're not allowed to let that anger define you. It doesn't get to control you. I don't know if I can forgive her, Josh said quietly, his voice shaking slightly. I don't know if I can forgive any of them. She lied to me. My whole life. I don't know if you have to forgive right now, Emily said. I think forgiveness is something that happens when you're ready. But what you can do is make sure you don't let it tear you apart. Don't let this thing, whatever it is, destroy you. Josh looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of confusion and pain. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to do it all at once, Emily said gently. You just take it one step at a time. And when you're ready, you can start to heal. In the living room, Sarah had come out of her room and was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the half-drunk cup of coffee in front of her. She had tried to busy herself with chores, tried to distract herself from the knot of tension building in her chest, but it was impossible. The space felt too small, too suffocating. She could hear Mark in the next room, the faint sound of him moving, the way he tried to keep himself busy. She could feel the distance between them, stretching wider and wider with every passing moment. The pain in her chest wasn't just emotional, it was physical, too. It was like there was a wound inside her that wouldn't stop bleeding, no matter what she did to patch it up. Mark's voice broke into her thoughts, low and hesitant. Sarah, we need to talk. She took a deep breath, wiping her hands on the front of her jeans before standing up. She nodded, even though she wasn't sure what to expect. Mark was standing by the window, his back to her. He didn't turn around when she entered the room. I don't know what to say anymore, he muttered. I don't know how to fix this. I don't either, Sarah admitted quietly. I don't know if we can. Mark finally turned around, his eyes tired and heavy with unshed tears. I've been trying so hard to hold everything together, Sarah. But it feels like I'm losing everything. You're not losing everything, she said softly, walking towards him. But I don't know how to make this right. Mark looked at her for a long time, the silence stretching between them like an old wound, still raw. I don't think we can fix it all at once. Maybe we don't even have to fix it. Maybe we just have to live with it. Together. Sarah felt her heart ache, but she nodded. Together. Later that day, the family sat in the living room, the air still tense but not as unbearable as it had been. Josh hadn't come out of his room, and Sarah and Mark hadn't spoken much after their conversation. But they were together, at least in body, even if their hearts and minds were still far apart. The house was quiet, the only sound the occasional crackling of the radiator and the soft hum of the fridge in the corner. The storm outside had started to die down, but the storm inside, the one that had torn them all apart, was still very much alive. And no one knew how long it would take to calm down. The days following the confrontation had been quieter, but the tension in the apartment had only thickened. Everyone was on edge, pretending that things were fine when they clearly weren't. The snow had finally stopped, leaving behind a world blanketed in white. Outside, everything looked serene, as though nothing had changed. But inside the walls of the apartment, it felt like a storm was still raging. Josh hadn't spoken much since his conversation with Emily. He spent most of his time in his room, locked away from everyone. The anger was still there, buried deep beneath a thick layer of exhaustion. He wasn't sure of who he was angry at, his mother, Mark, or himself. The entire situation felt like a betrayal, and that feeling of being trapped between conflicting emotions was slowly eating away at him. Mark had tried to talk to him, tried to reach out, but Josh wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to face the reality of it all. He didn't know how to process the idea that his entire life, everything he thought he knew, had been built on lies. He didn't know how to look at his mother and pretend that nothing had changed. But it wasn't just about the test anymore. It wasn't even just about Mark. It was about the fracture that had appeared between them all. The thread that had once connected them all felt thinner, weaker, and Josh couldn't see how it could ever be repaired. In the kitchen, Sarah stood over the sink, her mind racing. She hadn't slept much in the past few days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Josh's face, the hurt in his eyes, the betrayal in his voice. It was like a knife twisting in her chest. She had tried to make things right. She had tried to tell him the truth, to explain why she had kept things hidden for so long. But now, she wasn't sure if the damage was permanent. She wasn't sure if their relationship could ever go back to what it had been. She turned off the faucet, drying her hands with a towel, and took a deep breath. The weight of everything pressing on her chest was suffocating, and she knew she couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. She had to do something. But what? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Mark standing in the doorway, his face weary and lined with exhaustion. It was like they were both carrying invisible burdens, each of them too proud to admit how much they needed help. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, the tension between them palpable. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what he had to say, or if she even had the strength to have another conversation that might only make things worse. But she nodded. "I know." Mark took a deep breath and stepped into the kitchen, standing next to her at the counter. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, side by side, the weight of their shared silence heavier than any words they could have said. Finally, Mark broke the quiet. "I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to fix this." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "Neither do I. I thought I was doing the right thing by protecting him. But now I don't know. I feel like I've ruined everything." Mark shook his head. "You didn't ruin everything. But I'm not sure we can fix it either. I'm not sure we can go back to the way things were. I don't want things to stay like this," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I want to fix it. I want things to go back to normal." Mark looked at her, his face unreadable. "But maybe we can't go back. Maybe we have to figure out how to move forward, even if we don't know what that looks like." Sarah's heart tightened in her chest. Moving forward. It sounded so simple, but it felt impossible. How could they move forward when everything had fallen apart? In Josh's room, Emily had knocked on the door a few minutes earlier, but there had been no answer. She hesitated for a moment before slowly turning the knob and pushing it open. She found him sitting on the floor by his bed, his back against the wall, staring out the window. "Josh?" she called softly, stepping inside. He didn't look at her. He didn't even move. "Josh, we need to talk," she said again, her voice gentler this time. He didn't respond, but Emily could see that he was still breathing, still holding on. She moved closer, sitting down beside him, but he still didn't look at her. She didn't push him. She just sat there, waiting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Josh spoke. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice quiet, almost distant. "I don't know who to trust anymore. I don't know what's real." Emily nodded, her heart aching for him. She had watched him go through so much over the past few days, and it hurt her to see him like this. But she knew there was nothing she could say to make it better. He had to find his own way through it. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," she said softly. "You just have to take it one step at a time." Josh shook his head, his hands gripping his knees tightly. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can fix this. It feels too broken." Emily turned to face him, her voice steady but full of compassion. "You don't have to fix it, Josh. Not everything can be fixed. Sometimes you just have to live with the hurt until it fades." Josh looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. "But how do I live with it? How do I forgive her?" Emily sighed. "Forgiveness isn't always something you can just choose to do. Sometimes it comes when you're ready. And sometimes it doesn't come at all." Josh looked down at his hands, his shoulders shaking with a quiet sob. "I don't know if I can ever forgive her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You don't have to forgive her today. You don't have to forgive anyone until you're ready," Emily said, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. "But you do have to start somewhere. And that's enough for now." Josh leaned into her, his body racked with quiet sobs. He didn't have the answers, and maybe he never would. but for the first time in days he felt a small sense of peace, knowing that he didn't have to have it all figured out. In the kitchen, Sarah and Mark sat at the table, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air between them. Neither of them had any answers. They both felt lost, unsure of how to move forward. But they knew one thing: they couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. They had to face the truth, all of them did. And only then would they be able to find their way back to each other. But whether they would be able to repair the broken pieces of their lives, no one knew yet. The path ahead was uncertain, and it would take more than just words to heal the wounds they had inflicted on each other. The morning after the emotional conversations, the apartment felt eerily calm. The heavy weight of the past few days lingered in the air like the final notes of a song, still echoing, still unresolved. There were no immediate answers, no magic words that could fix everything. But everyone had, in their own way, begun to come to terms with the reality that nothing was the same anymore. Josh had stayed in his room, a habit he'd developed since the test results had come back, isolating himself even more. Sarah had checked on him twice that morning, but each time, he'd closed the door without a word, giving her nothing but the faintest of nods when she asked if he needed anything. It was as if he had retreated into a world that only he understood, and the rest of them were left to wonder if he would ever come back out. Mark, on the other hand, was trying to rebuild bridges, to connect, to find a way to make things right. But with every attempt, he only felt further apart from everyone. Sarah was distant, her eyes filled with an aching sadness that he didn't know how to heal. And Josh was so lost in his own pain that Mark didn't even know how to begin reaching him. Emily was the only one who seemed to understand the weight they were all carrying. She wasn't trying to fix anything anymore. She wasn't trying to make them all feel better. She was simply there, a constant presence in the chaos. She was the glue holding them together, even though she, too, was struggling with the pull of her own emotions. Sarah walked through the living room, her eyes lingering on the clock. It was nearly noon. She had avoided the kitchen all morning, not wanting to face the silence that had settled over the space where they used to gather. She could hear faint sounds coming from Josh's room, the low hum of his music, the muffled voices of his friends on the other end of his phone, but nothing that suggested he was willing to open up. She stood at the window for a long time, watching the snow pile up on the streets, blanketing the world outside. It seemed so quiet, so peaceful. And yet inside, everything felt like a storm waiting to break. "Sarah?" Mark's voice broke into her thoughts, making her turn. She smiled weakly. "Yeah? I think we need to talk." She nodded, then led him to the small dining area where they had eaten many family dinners in the past. It felt surreal to be sitting here now, knowing how much had changed in such a short time. "We're falling apart," Mark said simply, his voice thick with frustration. "I don't know how to fix this, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose Josh either." Sarah looked down at the table, trying to find the right words. "I don't know how to fix it either. I don't know if we can." "I think we can," Mark said, his voice softening as he reached across the table to take her hand. "But we have to start with honesty. We need to be honest with ourselves, with Josh, with each other. I don't know if Josh is ready for that," Sarah whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know if he'll ever be ready." Mark squeezed her hand gently. "We don't have to fix everything right away. But we can start by showing him that we're here, that we're not going anywhere. That we want to be a family again." Upstairs, Emily knocked on Josh's door again. This time, she didn't wait for him to answer. She opened the door slowly, her heart aching as she saw him sitting at his desk, headphones in, eyes glued to the screen of his laptop. It was the same routine as the past few days, an escape into the digital world, where nothing could touch him, where the pain couldn't find its way through. "Josh," Emily said softly, walking over to him. "We need to talk." Josh didn't look up. He barely acknowledged her presence. "I know you're angry," Emily continued, pulling up the chair next to him. "And I know you feel betrayed. But we can't keep pretending that everything is fine. We have to face this." Josh's fingers froze on the keyboard, But he didn't speak. Emily let the silence stretch between them, letting him process her words. Finally, after what felt like hours, Josh spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to forgive her, Emily. I don't know how to go back to how things were before." Emily nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "You don't have to forgive her right now. You don't even have to forgive her at all. But you do have to decide what comes next. You have to decide how you're going to move forward." Josh ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I want to." Emily reached out and gently placed a hand on his. "It's okay not to know. But you have to decide for yourself. Don't let this keep you locked inside, Josh. Don't let this pain define you." For the first time in days, Josh looked at her. His eyes were tired, but there was a flicker of something else. A recognition, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way out of this. Later that afternoon, as the family gathered in the living room, a heavy silence hung in the air. It was Sarah who spoke first, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Mark and I talked," she said, glancing at him before continuing. "We don't have all the answers, but we want to try to make this work. We want to rebuild piece by piece." Mark nodded. "We don't know how long it will take, but we're in this together. And I want to try." There was a long pause before Josh finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I used to," he said quietly, looking at his parents. "But I don't want to keep pushing you away. I don't want to live in this anger anymore." Sarah and Mark exchanged a glance. They didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in days, they felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead would be difficult. But it was a start. The evening came, and with it, a strange sense of calm. The family sat together in the living room, the TV softly playing in the background. The air between them wasn't as heavy as it had been, but the silence was still thick with unspoken things. Josh, still distant, sat on the couch with Emily beside him. They hadn't spoken much, but he seemed to be absorbing everything, letting it all settle inside him. It wasn't fixed, not by a long shot. But they had taken the first step toward healing, and for that moment, that was enough. The future still seemed uncertain, and the wounds were still raw. But for the first time in a long time, they weren't facing it alone. The morning after their quiet moment of understanding, the air still felt thick with unresolved tension, but there was also something new, a fragile thread of hope woven between the cracks. It was as if they had collectively agreed, without saying it out loud, that they couldn't just keep falling apart. Something had to change. Josh hadn't said much since the conversation the day before, but he wasn't withdrawing as much as he had. He still kept to himself, but the walls he had built around himself seemed a little thinner, like he was starting to allow the possibility that there was a way out of his pain. For Sarah, it felt like the calm before the storm. She knew that this fragile piece they had built could shatter at any moment. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of optimism. Maybe they could fix this. Maybe they could find their way back to each other, even if it took time. In the kitchen, Sarah and Mark were sitting across from each other, a pot of coffee between them. They hadn't had a real conversation like this in ages, not since before the test results had come back, not since their world had tilted on its axis. And as they sat there, quietly sipping their coffee, the enormity of what they were facing slowly began to settle in. "We can't go back to the way things were," Mark said quietly, his gaze fixed on his cup. "But I think we can find a new way. A new normal." Sarah nodded. "I want to believe that. I want to believe that we can fix this. But I don't know if I'm strong enough." Mark looked at her, his expression full of compassion. "We're in this together, Sarah. We'll figure it out." Upstairs, Josh sat in his room, staring at the walls that had once felt like a sanctuary but now felt more like a prison. The test results had shattered everything he had thought he knew. He wasn't sure where he fit in anymore, and that feeling of displacement gnawed at him like a constant itch he couldn't scratch. Emily had come by earlier that morning, but he had turned her away. Not because he didn't appreciate her presence, but because he wasn't ready to face what was inside of him. He wasn't ready to face the anger, the hurt, and the confusion. He wasn't even sure how to talk about it yet. He glanced at his phone, the notification from the DNA testing company still lingering on the screen. He had been tempted to delete it, to erase the last shred of confirmation that had changed everything. But he didn't. Part of him still needed the proof. The other part was terrified of what it meant. Josh got up and walked over to his window, gazing out at the snow-covered streets. The world outside seemed so unchanged, so oblivious to everything that had happened inside these walls. But here, everything felt different. Nothing was the same anymore. Emily sat on the couch in the living room, watching the quiet rhythm of the household. It was strange, how everything had shifted but remained the same. Everyone was still here, still breathing, still existing together under this roof. But she knew that things were far from simple. She was trying, in her own way, to be the glue that held everything together. But even she didn't know how long that would last. She wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend to be fine when everyone around her was falling apart. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down at the screen. It was a message from Josh, simple and to the point: "We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he had reached out to her in days. Emily quickly stood up and walked toward the stairs, her mind racing. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure: this conversation would be different. When Emily knocked on Josh's door, she didn't wait for him to answer. She just opened it and stepped inside, her heart beating a little faster as she saw him sitting on the bed, his head in his hands. His posture was defeated, and she immediately felt a wave of sympathy for him. "Josh!" she started softly, sitting down next to him. He didn't look up, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his body was rigid with emotion. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to shut you out. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to fix what's broken." Emily placed a hand on his arm, gently trying to comfort him. "You don't have to fix it right away. You don't have to fix anything. You just have to take it one step at a time." "I don't even know where to start," Josh admitted, his voice breaking. "I feel like everything I thought I knew is a lie. I don't even know who I am anymore." Emily felt her heart ache for him. She knew that the pain he was feeling wasn't something that could be fixed with words. It was something that would take time, a long time. But she also knew that the first step was to allow him to say it, to let him admit how lost he felt. "You don't have to figure it all out now," she said gently. "You just have to let yourself feel what you're feeling. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to not have all the answers." Josh turned his head to look at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and pain. "I don't know if I can forgive them. I don't know if I can ever trust them again." Emily sighed, her heart heavy. "Forgiveness doesn't happen on anyone's timeline but your own, Josh. And you don't have to forgive them today. Or tomorrow. You just have to decide what you need to move forward. And that's something only you can figure out." In the living room, Sarah and Mark were still sitting at the table, the silence between them comfortable, but heavy. They both knew that they had to start talking about the future, about what it looked like now, with all the changes. But they didn't have the words. Mark finally broke the silence. "It's going to take time, isn't it?" Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with both sadness and determination. "I don't know if it will ever be the same. But we have to try. For Josh. For us." Mark nodded, squeezing her hand. "We'll take it one day at a time. Together." Later that evening, as the snow continued to fall softly outside, the family gathered in the living room again. The air was thick with unspoken things, but there was a shared understanding between them. They had all taken the first step toward healing, even if they didn't know exactly what the journey would look like. Josh sat beside Emily, his shoulders a little less tense, his eyes a little more focused. Sarah and Mark were sitting across from them, their hands intertwined, their silent support for each other evident. It wasn't a perfect moment. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like a real one. And for that, they were all willing to fight. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least they were on it together. The day after their tentative steps toward healing, the family was slowly settling into their new dynamic, but it wasn't easy. The cracks in their relationship were still visible, even if they tried to cover them up with silence or forced smiles. Everyone was trying to act like things were back to normal, but the weight of everything that had happened still hung over them like an invisible cloud. Josh, despite his moment of vulnerability the day before, was still struggling. He'd retreated into his room again, spending more time than ever locked away, the door to his world firmly shut. He wasn't avoiding them exactly. He still ate with them, still sat in the same room, but he had put up a wall, one that no one seemed able to break down. Sarah had hoped that after their brief conversation, things might have improved, but she could feel the tension growing again. It wasn't just between her and Mark, it was between her and Josh, too. Her son was slipping away from her, and she didn't know how to bring him back. There was a deep fear growing inside of her, a fear that things might never be the same again, no matter how hard they tried. Mark was still trying to hold everything together, but he was starting to realize just how much he had ignored over the years. The cracks in their family, the things they'd all brushed under the rug, were suddenly coming to light, and it was terrifying. He hadn't realized how much damage had been done, how much they had all been pretending for so long. He and Sarah sat at the kitchen table again, the same quiet unease between them that had been there for days. Neither of them knew how to bridge the gap between them, but they both knew they had to start talking about what was next. It couldn't stay like this. "We need to have a conversation with Josh," Mark said, breaking the silence. "I don't think he's going to come to us. Not yet, anyway. We need to show him that we're here. But I'm not sure how." Sarah nodded, her eyes full of sadness. "He's not ready to talk. He's not ready to forgive us. And I don't know if he ever will be." Mark reached across the table and took her hand. "We can't force him, Sarah. But we can be patient. We can show him that we're willing to give him the space he needs. And when he's ready, we'll be here." Upstairs, Emily knocked on Josh's door once more. She had been trying to find a way to break through to him, but he had become more distant with each passing day. He hadn't responded to any of her texts, and he was barely acknowledging her when she was around. She knew he was still hurting, but it was hard to watch him spiral further away. "Josh," Emily called softly through the door. "Can we talk?" There was no answer. "Please," she added, her voice quieter now. "I just want to make sure you're okay." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, finally, the door creaked open just a crack, and Josh's face appeared, his eyes guarded but tired. "I'm fine," he said, his voice flat. "I don't need to talk." Emily sighed, feeling the familiar ache in her chest. She could see the walls he was building, see how much he was shutting everyone out. But she also saw something else, the flicker of pain beneath his cold exterior. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she said softly. "But I just want you to know that I'm here for you. Whenever you're ready." Josh didn't respond, but the slightest shift in his expression told Emily everything she needed to know. He wasn't ready, but maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand that he didn't have to carry everything alone. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in the living room, a strange quietness between them. Josh was there, sitting in his usual spot, but his eyes were fixed on his phone. He hadn't said a word since entering the room, but Sarah noticed the tension in his posture. He was trying, in his own way, to be there. But the weight of the past still loomed large. Emily sat beside him, her hand resting on the arm of the couch, as if offering silent support. Mark and Sarah were across from them, their faces drawn with exhaustion. "Josh," Sarah finally said, her voice tentative. "Can we talk?" Josh didn't look up. "I don't know what there is to say. We know things are hard," Sarah continued. "And we know that we can't fix everything overnight. But we want to try. We want to be here for you." Josh sighed, his frustration palpable. You don't get it. You don't know what it feels like. You don't know what I'm going through. Sarah's heart broke a little at his words. She had known it would be hard, but hearing it from him, hearing his pain, made it so much more real. I know I don't know exactly what you're feeling, she said softly. But I want to understand. I want to help you get through this, even if it takes time. We can't fix everything, but we can be here, together. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Sarah thought Josh might say something more. But instead, he just shook his head, standing up abruptly. I'm not ready, he said, his voice tight. Maybe I never will be. And with that, he left the room, disappearing into the safety of his room again, leaving his family behind in silence. Mark let out a long, tired breath as he leaned back in his chair. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, his voice low. I don't know what to do anymore. Sarah's eyes filled with unshed tears, her hands trembling. I don't know if we can fix it. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. I don't think we can, Mark replied quietly. But maybe we don't have to. Maybe we just have to figure out what comes next. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. I want to believe that. I want to believe that there's a way forward. But it feels so impossible. Mark reached out and took her hand again, squeezing it gently. It won't be easy. But we'll take it one step at a time. Together. As the day wore on, the quiet tension remained in the house. No one had the answers, and no one had a clear direction. But they were trying. They were trying to find their way through the wreckage, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths. Josh was still hurting, still angry, and still uncertain about how to move forward. Sarah and Mark were struggling to reconnect, unsure of where their marriage stood after everything that had come to light. Emily, too, was quietly carrying her own burdens, torn between wanting to help and knowing that she couldn't fix things for them. But despite the walls between them, there was still hope, a faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild, piece by piece, one step at a time. The cracks were still there, but at least they were acknowledging them now. The road to healing wasn't going to be easy, but it was a road they would have to walk together. It had been days since the heavy conversation in the living room, and despite the silence, there was a palpable tension that had settled in the house like dust on forgotten furniture. Each person was locked in their own world, too unsure of how to move forward but too afraid to speak up again for fear of unraveling everything that had already been said. Josh had barely left his room in the past 2 days. He ate his meals in isolation, sat silently at the table, and retreated back to his sanctuary as soon as the day came to a close. His withdrawal had become more pronounced, and it seemed like the once open, talkative boy they all knew had been replaced by someone distant, almost foreign. Mark noticed the shift but didn't know how to bridge the gap between them. He had tried a couple of times to speak to Josh, but every conversation ended abruptly with a wall of silence. The door had been closed on their relationship for now, and there was nothing Mark could do to force it open. Sarah felt helpless. She had tried to offer him space, but now she wondered if perhaps he needed more than just time. Did he need someone to fight for him, to prove to him that they weren't giving up? Or was he too far gone, too entrenched in his own pain to hear her at all? That morning, Emily decided to visit Josh again. She had been trying to give him space, but the gnawing feeling that he was sinking deeper into isolation kept pulling her back. She knew he wasn't ready to talk to his parents, but maybe he would open up to her. Maybe she could help him find his way out of this. As she stood in front of his door, her hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before she knocked. When there was no immediate response, she knocked again, this time louder. "Josh?" she called through the door. "Can we talk?" A long pause followed before the door slowly creaked open. Josh stood on the other side, his face blank, his eyes betraying a quiet desperation. He wasn't angry, not this time, but there was a sadness in him that made Emily's heart ache. "I don't feel like talking," he said flatly, his tone emotionless. Emily stepped inside anyway, closing the door softly behind her. "I don't want to push you, but I think you need to talk. Even if it's just to someone who's not Your parents. Josh sighed, running his hands through his messy hair. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what's even left to fix. Emily took a step closer, her voice soft. It's okay not to know. You don't have to fix anything. You just have to let yourself feel it, Josh. Let it out. Josh shook his head, avoiding her gaze. I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel anymore. Everything's just messed up. And I don't know if I can forgive them. There was a quiet sadness in his voice that Emily could hear beneath the anger. She wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but she knew better than to force her presence on him. All she could do was give him a safe space to be vulnerable, even if he wasn't ready to share yet. You don't have to forgive them today, Emily said gently. But maybe you need to start thinking about what you want, Josh. Not for anyone else. For you. Josh didn't respond, but the look in his eyes softened just the slightest bit. Emily could see it, the crack in the armor. And maybe that was all he needed for now. A crack, not a breakthrough. Meanwhile, downstairs, Mark and Sarah were having a quiet conversation in the kitchen, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on both of them. I'm worried about him, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper as she stirred her coffee. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when I know he's shutting us out. He needs help, Mark. Real help. Mark leaned back against the counter, his brow furrowed in thought. I know. But what do we do? We can't force him to talk to us. We can't force him to forgive us. All we can do is give him the space he needs. I don't think that's enough anymore, Sarah replied, her voice tinged with frustration. I think we've been giving him too much space. We're letting him pull away, and the more we let him do that, the further he goes. It's like we're standing on the sidelines, waiting for him to come to us. But he's drowning, Mark. Mark sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what the right answer is. I just want him back. I want my son back. Sarah turned to him, her face filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. We need to be more than just his parents right now. We need to be there for him, but we need to push him, gently. He's never going to come to us unless we show him that we're not going to give up on him. Mark stared at her for a long moment, seeing the resolve in her eyes. He knew she was right, even if it scared him to admit it. They couldn't afford to sit idly by anymore. They had to act. Upstairs, Emily sat with Josh for a little while longer, offering him the comfort of her presence. She didn't push him to talk, didn't force him to open up. But she was there, in the quiet, holding the space for him to decide when he was ready. When she eventually stood to leave, Josh didn't stop her. But as she reached for the door, he spoke, his voice almost a whisper. Thanks, he said softly, his words barely audible. I don't know what to do with all of this. But thanks for not giving up on me. Emily smiled faintly, her heart aching for him. I won't. I promise. As she walked out, Josh remained in his room, staring out the window once more, lost in his thoughts. He didn't know how to fix it, didn't know where to start, but the first step had already been taken. Maybe, just maybe, he could begin to see a way forward. A small glimmer of hope, hidden in the cracks, began to emerge. That evening, the family sat down together for dinner. It was awkward at first, everyone unsure of how to act, how to begin rebuilding the broken pieces. But as the meal went on, the tension began to ease, and small, quiet conversations started to emerge. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it was something. A step. A small but significant step toward healing. Josh didn't speak much during dinner, but he didn't retreat to his room either. He stayed at the table, his presence a quiet reminder that things were changing, slowly but surely. He wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to let himself believe that healing was possible. And as the evening came to a close, the family knew that they still had a long way to go. But for the first time in a while, they felt like they weren't walking the road alone. The road was long and filled with uncertainty, but they were beginning to move forward, one step at a time. The family was quieter than usual that evening, sitting together in the living room, each person lost in their own thoughts. The atmosphere was no longer filled with the sharp tension that had plagued them for so long, but instead, it was heavy with the weight of all that had been said and all that had been left unsaid. Josh had spent the day in his room again, but this time, there was no sense of rejection in the air. It wasn't the cold silence of avoidance, but rather the distance of someone processing, someone still trying to find the words that they weren't ready to speak. It was different this time, a slight shift in the unspoken rhythm of their family. Sarah sat on the couch, staring at the fireplace, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee mug. The flickering flames in the hearth were a reminder of the warmth they used to share, a warmth that seemed so distant now, yet still reachable if they were willing to rebuild it. Mark sat beside her, his thoughts equally clouded. He had never been good at expressing his feelings, and navigating the complexity of his own emotions, let alone the emotions of his family. But the events of the last few weeks had forced him to confront parts of himself he had long buried. He wasn't sure where to go from here, but he knew one thing: he wasn't ready to give up on his family. The silence between them was a comfortable one now. It was no longer full of the tension of the past, but more of a quiet understanding. They were both trying to figure out how to move forward, trying to make sense of the new dynamic in their household. And for the first time in a long time, they both felt a little less lost. Emily was in her room, the door slightly ajar, as she worked on her laptop. She had learned to be patient with her brother, to give him the space he needed, but also to let him know that she was there for him whenever he was ready to talk. She wasn't sure how much longer she could wait, but she knew pushing him would only make things worse. She had been writing a message to her friends, updating them on how things had been at home, when she heard the faintest sound from the hallway. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat, as Josh appeared in the doorway. For a moment, they just stood there, either of them speaking. Emily felt a rush of hope surge through her. She had learned not to expect too much, but this was a sign. Josh wasn't shutting himself away from them anymore. He was here. "Can we talk?" Josh's voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but there was a vulnerability in his tone that she hadn't heard in a long time. Emily smiled softly, nodding. "Of course." She motioned for him to sit, and after a long pause, Josh stepped inside, sitting on the edge of her bed. Neither of them said anything for a while. The silence was comfortable this time, not strained, just two people sharing space as they both processed everything that had happened. Finally, Emily spoke, breaking the silence. "You know, you don't have to fix everything all at once. It's okay to not have all the answers." Josh glanced up at her, his eyes searching. "I know. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to feel." Emily nodded. "It's okay to feel confused. It's okay to feel angry or sad or just stuck. You don't have to have it all figured out." Josh sat there, staring at his hands, his fingers curling into fists, and then relaxing again. He looked like he was about to say something, but the words weren't coming. Emily didn't press him. She waited, giving him the time he needed to find the right moment to speak. "I don't know how to forgive them," Josh said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to forgive myself." Emily's heart broke for him. She reached out, placing a hand on his, her grip light but firm. "You don't have to do it all right now. Forgiveness doesn't have to happen overnight. You'll get there when you're ready." Josh looked up at her then, his expression softening. There was a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or a sense of peace, but it was fleeting. He still had a long way to go, and he knew it. But for the first time, he didn't feel completely alone in the journey. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," Josh said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice, as if he was unsure if that statement was still true. Emily gave him a small smile. "Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. But I'll be here, no matter what." Downstairs, Sarah and Mark exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. They had been watching from the doorway, though they had kept their distance, not wanting to intrude on what was a private moment between siblings. But they both felt the same quiet sense of relief. Josh wasn't ready to come back to them, not yet, but he was reaching out in his own way. "I think he'll be okay," Sarah said quietly, breaking the silence. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he'll get there." Mark nodded, but there was still a weight on his chest. "I hope so. But I'm scared, Sarah. I'm scared that it's too late for him to forgive me. For us." "It's not too late," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. "We'll just have to keep showing up, day after day, no matter how long it takes." Mark turned to her, his expression softening. "I'm ready. I'll keep showing up. Whatever it takes." That night, the family gathered around the dinner table once more, though the atmosphere was markedly different. There was no grand reconciliation, no sudden breakthrough, but there was a quiet understanding between them. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was just the quiet of a family learning to navigate their new reality. Josh was there, sitting at the table, his eyes meeting his parents every so often, but his presence alone was enough. He was there, in the room, sharing a space with them again. And for now, that was enough. The family ate their meal together in relative peace, and though the cracks in their relationship were still there, they weren't as sharp anymore. They weren't as all-consuming. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be days of doubt, days of struggle. But they also knew that they were starting to rebuild. They were starting to heal. And that was a step in the right direction. The road to healing was long, and there was no telling what would come next, but they were walking it together. And that, at least, was something.